Welcome to the Flex Podcast. I'm Blake Liddell, and I'm joined again by my brother-in-law and good friend, Nick DeMeo.
Hello.
So in this show, we'll just review some of our predictions from last week's episode. We told you some deep sleepers we had, and we'll kind of talk about how they did, if they're still sleeping or if they actually woke up. Next, we'll talk about Week 5's big performers and kind of tell you how they're going to do going forward. After that, we'll talk about the results of Week 6's Thursday night game between the Falcons and Saints. And then we'll wrap up with our Week 6 deep sleepers. So, Nick, I guess we'll start with your deep sleeper who actually turned out to do pretty well.
Yeah, my deep sleeper was Marquez Wilson. And again, I think I said last episode, but it bears repeating, no pun intended, that I'm a giant Bears fan. So I had seen to that point 4 weeks of him playing, a little in week 1, but that was when Jeffrey was for the most part healthy. So weeks 2, 3, and 4, I saw him play, and I saw a receiver that's the same build as Jeffrey and pretty much in the same mold as Alshon Jeffrey. When he came out of college, he was touted as a top draft pick guy, a first round talent, and he was the guy, if memory serves me right, I believe he was the guy that the coach punched him or something, and he quit on the team. So so he basically quit. He fell to the 7th round. Anyway, that's ancient history. His stat line against the Chiefs: he had 6 catches, he had 85 yards, and he had a touchdown. So, the Chiefs have a notorious bad pass defense. Cutler had few weapons, and Wilson stepped up and played well. I think going forward, there's some rumbles that Kevin White's getting closer. I don't think they're going to rush him back, and if they do, or if he does see time, I really think it's going to be in limited packages. I think Wilson's going to be the starter opposite Alshon Jeffrey if Jeffrey can stay healthy. That would let them shift Royal into the slot, and that's kind of the 3 wide receivers. Well, I think they envisioned, obviously, Jeffrey, Kevin White, and Eddie Royal, but now that Wilson's kind of emerged and he's a target monster, Cutler actually really seems to have a good chemistry with him. I don't know if he's a safe play. I don't know if you want to play him consistently, but he's certainly worth a bench spot, and especially in 12-team leagues, 14-team leagues. I think he actually could be worthy of a flex start. If it's PPR league, I think looking at it here, if you're in a standard league, you got 14 points. PPR, you got 20, and he's getting a ton of targets. I think he had 8 targets last week. I think he had 9 the week before, and he got 12 of those passes. So out of 17 targets, he caught 12 passes and a TD. So, I mean, that's a pretty good split right there. I was impressed. The touchdown catch he had was fabulous. It was a great catch over the shoulder to the corner of the end zone. I mean, he's a very talented receiver. So, just keep your eye on him. I think you're going to see him get scooped up, especially if he does well again. But again, the Bears' bye is after this game in Detroit, so he probably is going to stay available. So, just keep your eye on him.
Yeah, and to add to what you're saying, Jeffrey, he may or may not play this week again. I mean, really, with the way Fox is kind of hiding his hand, you don't really know with these guys if they're going to start or not. And, like you said, with the bye week coming up in Week 7, they may just give Jeffrey some rest this week. Also, I don't know if you read today, Bennett actually came down with, I think it was a quad injury.
Yeah, he's questionable now.
So I mean that could spell another good game for Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned White, and I have a tough time believing in these guys who, like you said, he's coming out of the draft and he hasn't built up any sort of rapport with Cutler, especially he hasn't seen an NFL game. So I mean, there's a lot of things where White could come in and he could light the world on fire, but I think there's a lot of things that kind of make him a little more of he may do well, but I think it's more likely that they may not even use him this year. Just
I
based
think
on his practice and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, if you're in a keeper league, White's worth keeping an eye on. But when he came out of West Virginia, the Bears drafted him 7th overall based on potential. He is your classic. This guy ran a very limited route tree. He was a great raw receiver at West Virginia, and when you have a guy that raw and he's a rookie and he's going to come in maybe at the earliest week 10, 11, 12, they're going to have him run go routes and see what he can do with them. He's not going to be a guy, he's not Amari Cooper. He's not a guy that, is a polished NFL receiver. So, these people that are saying White's coming back, that really doesn't mean much this year because he's going to be used so limited. He needs another offseason to just learn the NFL. And, I think if they're going to bring him back at the end of the year, it's just to kind of get him a little bit of NFL game time experience. But it's going to be in, maybe two packages a game, and that'll be that.
Well, and Nick, you had a great week with your sleeper pick. So, I had two sleeper picks. One did great, one not so great. So I had let's start with the bad and just get that out of the way. I mentioned McCluster. I really had my eye on him in my league because it's a return yards league, and he actually had 11 points there, which is okay, but not the best. And then you get to standard PPR, and he had 2 in standard, 3 in PPR. That game, it wasn't a good game at all. It was a snooze
ugly
fest from start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And that running back by committee they have there, where they just go with basically whoever they want to on any given play. I think Antonio Andrews could maybe get some okay points as a fill-in flex from time to time, but nothing. I personally am staying away from that backfield completely, especially McCluster. Even in the return yards league, I can't see him having much value. I really thought the matchup was favorable for his skill set, but they just didn't use him the way I thought they would.
Yeah, he's the definition of a gadget player, and unfortunately, they don't know how to use the gadget properly. So, in Kansas City, I think he had a lot of value just because Andy Reid loves those kind of tweener running backs. He had it in like Brian Westbrook and Correll Buckhalter before his knees turned into mashed potatoes. But yeah, he's I don't think he's being used properly in Tennessee. And plus, I just think that team, the way they want to run their offense, I don't think he fits that well. I don't think he fits in that great. So, and Buffalo's not a terrible defense either. So
oh no, absolutely not.
You have a lot of guys. You had a lot of factors going against him. I didn't think it was a terrible sleeper pick, but it's definitely a boomer bust pick. So this week will be the week he gets 25 points.
Oh, of course, just because I've said don't pick him up at all. He's gonna explode. But my other sleeper pick on the week was Jamison Crowder, and I was actually pretty happy with that one. He didn't get in the end zone, but he did look really good against my Atlanta Falcons. He is doing some returns, so again, that could be good in return yard leagues. But I think where his value is especially while Deshaun Jackson is out. He has a lot of targets. He was 8 for 8 receptions and targets for 87 yards. Which is a great stat line. I love the guys who they may not get in the end zone. You may see him get a lot of yards, and really, if you're getting a lot of yards, that just means it's a matter of time before you get in the end zone. Unless, for like a running back, I can see where it's only like a red zone type running back. But for wide receivers, if you've got the yards, the touchdowns will be soon to follow. The only negative on him, he had a fumble during the game, but again, he still did very well fantasy wise.
Yeah, and I think they're saying Deshaun Jackson might come back this week, but I would imagine the guy that's going to kind of get shifted out of that offense is Pierre Garçon, because he's had some terrible drops this year, and him and Kirk Cousins, he's getting his targets. They just don't look like they're on the same page all the time. And I can recall off the top of my head at least 2 or 3 egregious drops he had against the Falcons. So you got a rookie pushing him. That's either going to make Pierre Garçon better or Jamison Crowder is going to take his place. But yeah, with Jordan Reed out again with a concussion, I think Jamison Crowder is a good guy to hold on to, at least going into their bye, which, if I remember correctly, is not this week but next week, or not next week, the week after.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. A name to mention as well. This has nothing to do really with the sleeper pick, just Washington in general. Carrier, I think, had a pretty good game as well, filling in for Reed. So
yeah,
I don't know. Tight ends to me in general are so boom and bust, and we kind of talked about that last episode. But Carrier looks like he could have a spot in that offense, just filling in for Reed. So that's another guy to look at.
I'll touch on this later, but it goes to say the same thing about Carrier. Is if you're an NFL team, you don't trade a draft pick for a tight end unless you plan on using him. And they shipped, I believe, a 7th rounder to the 49ers for Carrier, and I think the rep on Carrier was that he was a great athlete. He just didn't have a spot in that 49ers offense, which is hard to believe seeing how they're kind of a train wreck. But, I think he was a guy that had a lot of talent. And, with Jordan Reed always injured, he's a guy that, yeah, you want to keep your eye on because he's got the talent. I think, he's another one that needs some experience. But he had a touchdown last week and, with Carrier or with Jordan Reed out this week and them playing a team like the Jets who are pretty good, but, not unsusceptible to tight ends putting damage on them, I think you could keep an eye on Carrier doing something similar.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, Nick, I guess we'll get into the Week 5 big performers.
Yeah.
I guess we'll just go by position. Let's start with quarterback with Josh McCown in Cleveland. He's been really lighting the world on fire these past couple games. What do you think about him?
I was originally a non-believer. It's going to take a lot to turn me into a believer. I believe he's like 35 or something. You wouldn't know it looking at, but he's in his mid-30s. He's an older guy, but I mean, the thing about Josh McCown is he put up 35 points against the Ravens, who are not the Ravens of yesteryear. He's got the Denver defense that's going to be without DeMarcus Ware, but I mean, Josh McCown is sneakily mobile. Like, he is a guy that can get out of the pocket, he can scramble, and he can throw on the run pretty well. He's got a newfound lover in this Barnage guy that kind of came out of nowhere. He's basically Jordan Cameron if Jordan Cameron could stay healthy in Cleveland. I don't know. I don't know if he's worth starting. You might want to stash him, though, because as much as I thought that team was going to be Manziel's, it looks like it's going to be McCown's. So, if you've got room on your bench, I don't know if I'd play him this week against Denver, but I would hold on to him. They're going to play Baltimore again. They've got Pittsburgh, that's not a very good defense. They've got a schedule that opens itself up to maybe Josh McCown replicating some of these performances. I don't think he'll get 35 points, but I didn't think Devontae Freeman would get 32 points like 4 weeks in a row. So who knows with McCown?
Yeah, I definitely wasn't a believer of McCown when the season started. Just kind of what we've seen from him before, and just even what we saw from him in the first couple games. I was actually hoping for Manziel to come out just because I have Benjamin on one of my teams, and I thought that would be they seem to have some sort of weird connection where, one knows exactly what the other one's going to be doing. But yeah, I mean, I think for the Cleveland team, McCown's definitely the answer. I never thought Manziel had any sort of chance there in terms of like just real life football application. It was more of a, like I said, wanting my own fantasy guys to benefit from Manziel being in. But yeah, I mean, McCown's been putting up just yards and yards and yards. The thing to note about it, though, is he did it against Oakland, who's, they're not known for their defense this year, that's for sure.
Right.
San Diego, again, kind of on the at least bottom third, I'd say, of defenses. And basically he got into a shootout with Baltimore this last game. And that seems to be what a lot of teams are doing, is just they're going head-to-head against Flacco with no wide receivers. Somehow he's just, like I said, getting into shootout after shootout. But yeah, I completely agree with you in terms of next week. He faces a tough Denver defense, and I think he has an ankle injury as well, so that his mobility is kind of going to take a hit, I think. So, those things combining, I don't think he'll be a good play next week. But yeah, I mean, he'd be a good backup depending on his matchups when you need him. You can look at his schedule going forward and kind of look at your own, I guess, starting quarterbacks. And if they line up just right, I don't have a problem playing McCown.
Yeah, I agree. I think, definitely a guy to keep your eye on. I think you could do worse than McCown, which is something I didn't think I'd be saying at the start of the season.
Yeah.
So I guess running backs, there were a slew of guys that had decent performances, and then there was, the unfortunate Jamal Charles injury. I guess we should talk about everyone's fantasy starlet, Devontae Freeman. He just played last night, again, put up another impressive performance against the Saints. I don't know. I was on the fence the beginning of the year, and it looks like he's just going to keep going. They tried to get Coleman some reps, and he unfortunately fumbled, which is, I think just a rookie getting his legs beneath him and kind of getting caught up to the NFL. But, 13 carries, 100 yards, that's That's a pretty darn good turnout for a guy that, you know the defense was zoning in on him and Julio Jones, and for him to keep, putting up these crazy points is just out of this world.
Yeah, and I'm a very big Falcons fan, and I basically owe Freeman an apology after last episode. I thought Coleman would be the starter, and I think the coaches did at the beginning of the season as well. But I mean, Freeman has really taken to this offense. Again, that zone blocking scheme. I think he saw a little bit of that in Florida State,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that he's just kind of at home in that. And actually, based on my comments in the last episode about Freeman, I had been seeing just article after article about how great Freeman was. And I was like, what are these guys seeing that I'm not? So I actually last weekend went back and reviewed every single running play of the first two games when he and Coleman were in. And something that I took away from that is just that, Coleman is a great running back, and I think, if another team drafted him, especially if they had an O line like we do, and he didn't have the competition of Devonta Freeman, I mean, he'd definitely be a starter. Obviously, the injuries kind of hobbling him a little bit, but he's definitely a good player. But looking back
Mm-hmm.
at those first two games, Freeman's doing just all the right things. He's making these small cuts basically every single time he touches the ball. He'll make a little jump cut, and whether he's getting passed to him, which he's great in the passing game, or if he's just getting the ball in the backfield, he makes these very small, like subtle cuts. But I think they're making a huge difference in throwing off the defense. And then he's just got
Yeah.
some explosiveness, and he's really been just going head on into defenders. And he's not the biggest guy, but I think his height, he's actually the same weight as Tevin Coleman, but he's a couple inches shorter, and I think that gives him a lower center of gravity. And him hitting defenders head on, he's really been going after him. I mean, I think he's just angry for whatever reason. He's
Yeah.
angry.
I think, again, you'll always have the durability concern just because of his size, but, he's a guy that, it's great if you're a fan, but it's also long term. You have to look at. He's a guy that seeks out contact, and that's always one of those things that inspires the team. I think when they see a guy running headfirst into a defender, but that'll put wear and tear on his body, and you just have to worry that I mean, that's really the only concern I think you have with him going forward is just durability, and whether or not he's going to slow down as the hits begin to pile up.
Well, and to add on top of that, like I said, those little cuts as well that he's making. The only thing that worries me about them, I mean, they're great in terms of like he's going 100% every single time, but when he's turned facing the quarterback, he catches the ball and kind of makes a little cut. And if you're doing that when a defender's coming on and going to hit you, I mean that does spell a little bit of a recipe for disaster in terms of
Mm-hmm.
knee injuries. And that I personally tore my ACL when I was 12, and unfortunately had to learn a lot about the whole process and everything like that. And that's kind of, I guess, the recipe of you're making a cut, so you're changing direction, you've got one foot planted, and then if anything comes in and alters that, I mean, you're looking at a ACL or any sort of ligament injury in that knee. So I mean, that's my only concern. But I mean, from a fantasy perspective and a fan perspective, I mean, you can't just worry about injuries constantly. You got to
Right.
just go with the hot hand, and that's what's happening in Atlanta.
Yeah, there's no glaring weakness, so all we can really point to at this point is just his size and say, well, maybe he'll start breaking down. But I mean, I think that's just, speculative. I think it's unrealistic to expect 30 points out of him every game this week or every game this year. But, even if he hadn't scored, I think he probably would have still gotten you 15, 16 points. So, I mean, that's probably, you're looking at that maybe being his floor because they seem to just be going to him in the run game and going to him solely in the passing game. But, Tevin Coleman looked good. I'm not going to lie. Like, before he fumbled, he was bursting through the hole, and I think his acceleration actually might be better than Devontae Freeman's. I think Freeman is a little more elusive, like you said, with the quick head bob or the quick, just the very minor juke that's going to maybe get us defender to shift his center of gravity. But, you know, I guess if you're in a keeper league, I'd look at Coleman because I certainly don't think they're just going to forget about him. I think he kind of got benched just as more of a message. But, I mean, Atlanta fumbled the ball, like 5 times yesterday. So it's not just Coleman that was fumbling. You had center snapping it into their butts and, like, all sorts of miscues. But, yeah, I mean, long story short, Freeman's a stud. I think he's going to be a stud the rest of this year. You got to worry about durability, like we said, but I don't think that's a concern that you need to really, you need to start him with confidence every week from here on out.
Well, yeah, and to go into a little bit more about Coleman, especially this week, I think he does get more and more carries, and really both of these guys, Freeman and Coleman, are just getting tons of yards with their opportunities.
Yeah.
I mean, Coleman, I think he had 4 carries for 40 yards. So, I mean, he's averaging 10 yards a carry. And, Freeman, I think his is a little bit lower, but obviously he's getting more opportunities. And the thing to note about Coleman as well going forward is, he did fumble. I personally don't think that was his fault at all. He got hit from one side, and then the defender made a great punch right on the ball that, I mean, he couldn't have seen coming. But,
right.
Something encouraging for his future is, he didn't, I don't think he immediately got benched or anything because of the fumble. They're kind of alternating drives between him and Freeman, and Coleman did go back into the game after the fumble. So, I mean, I think they see something in Coleman as well. And I think both of these guys have the potential to be productive, especially when considering all the fumbles that Atlanta had. They weren't getting as many chances as I think both of them will get in a typical game, especially if we're leading. And yeah, I mean, if we can keep the ball, I mean, obviously they're going to get more touches.
Yeah. In a Kyle Shanahan offense, you're going to see two running backs getting a lot of work. Isn't something that's not, this isn't the greatest show on turf Falcons from a couple years ago when they were throwing it 75 times a game. I mean, if they're up in the game, I don't think they're going to hesitate to run it with Freeman and Coleman if they've got 2 capable backs that can carry the load.
Absolutely not. Nick, you kind of mentioned a little bit about Jamal Charles. I mean, you hate to see a guy, especially of that caliber, but really, anyone to go down with an ACL. I mean, it's just devastating, especially when you're referring to an NFL player. I mean, that's just an automatic. They'll have to have surgery, and there's a lot that goes into those surgeries in terms of they usually will take a patellar tendon and replace it. And I won't get into the specifics, but what do you think the outlook of that backfield is now that Charles is out?
I really don't know what you can expect. I know there's a lot of it seems like every time running back goes down, it's never the direct backup that gets the attention. It's the 3rd or 4th string guy for whatever reason, and that seems to be with Shanderick West. I think, I guess they compare his running style to Jamal Charles, but I don't think that means he's going to be Jamal Charles. In Philadelphia, Andy Reid always had a pretty nice stable of running backs. He had Deuce Staley, he had Brian Westbrook, he had Correll Buckhalter. All those guys kind of cycled in and out for a while there. I think you're going to see it a little more. Like Jamal Charles was one of the few bell cows that's in the NFL. I think with him out, you're going to see a lot of probably split between Niall Davis and Shanderick West. They're probably hoping for a more thunder and lightning approach to, a thunder and lightning approach to the running back load instead of, leaning on one guy. And that's worked in the past. We saw it in New York with Brandon Jacobs and Ahmad Bradshaw for a while. And I think they had three-headed running back core there. But yeah, I mean, no matter what you think's going to happen, Jamal Charles was the gear to that Kansas City offense. And without it, I think this week against Minnesota, I think they're going to struggle. I think they're going to have problems finding their groove. Alex Smith, I have questions whether or not he's capable of leading an offense, and Andy Reid is so conservative, you have to wonder what the game plan is going to go to at this point. But if we're discussing solely running backs, I think the hot waiver pickup was Shanderick West, and if you have Niall Davis, I would keep an eye on him. I think the one game last year where Jamal Charles was injured, Niall Davis stepped right in and had like 120 yards and a couple TDs. So, I mean, he's not a terrible backup. He was never a guy that really could, never really could get a lot of playtime with Jamal Charles in front of him. But, I like Niall Davis. I'm holding my breath on Shanderick, but that's probably just because I'm so risk averse that I would take the guy that's kind of proven, even if it's in few limited carries, over the guy that might not be doing anything. But I guess we'll see. What do you think, Blake?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a murky situation right now in terms of I don't even think the Andy Reid knows what he's gonna do yet. The you never plan for your stud to go down. So, I mean, like you said, Niall Davis in the past has filled in for Charles. Not even just that one game. I don't have the stats in front of me, but he's from what I remember, anytime Charles had gone down, Niall Davis was the guy they turned to, and he just picked up where Charles left off. I mean, obviously he's not the caliber of Charles, like you said, but
Right.
he's a good enough running back that he can do some damage. But there were some comments from Andy Reid right after Charles went down, and he was. I think they're making a lot in the media about what he said to do about West. I think he said something like, "Oh, I like West a little bit better," or something along those lines. But I think that's kind of what the people are turning to in terms of deciding who's going to be the guy in Kansas City. West might be pretty good. He might do well. It's just a difficult situation in general. You also have DeAnthony Thomas as well in there, and I think they might use him a little bit in the passing game. Uh, it's kind of a. I wish you could just wait and see, and kind of know who the guy is, but because of the reactions on the waiver wire, I mean, basically you got who you got, and you kind of just have to hope that it's the right guy.
Yeah, and I think people need to also sort of temper their enthusiasm in a sense that, when a guy like this goes down, there isn't someone that's really conditioned behind him to step up and carry the load 20, 25 times. Uh, Usually when you see it, we saw it last year with Adrian Peterson, we see it with Arian Foster. When these guys go down, they turn into more of a committee or they just revert to going to more passing. And I think in Kansas City, Andy Reid is already so prone to passing it, overrunning it, that you're going to see a lot more to Jeremy Maclin. You're going to see a lot of stuff, hopefully, to Travis Kelce for those guys that are kind of waiting for Andy Reid to realize he's still on the roster. But, yeah, I don't know. Jamal Charles was good for, 15, 20 points a game. I don't know if his backups, maybe here and there they'll pepper in a game, but I would think between the two of them, you're probably going to see 6, 7 points from here on out between the two, each, and they'll add up to this a similar production. But I don't know if either one of them can. And maybe in a PPR league, you can see a guy like Shanderick West catching out of the backfield a bit more. But yeah, it's a bad situation. Hopefully, if you were a Charles owner, you were able to kind of maybe buy low on some of these guys that are underperforming, because I don't know if the backups are truly, they're worth definitely rostering, but I don't know if they're going to be anything that's going to, if anything is going to materialize out of the hype that you get, the week after a big star gets
Yeah,
injured.
and on top of that, I mean, this really has nothing to do with these guys, but I think if you are a Charles owner and you need a running back, the answer isn't necessarily in the Kansas City backfield. It might be someone like
Right.
Christine Michael in Dallas, who may take the starting job
Yeah.
after this week's bye. That's somebody who I've been targeting. Ahmad Bradshaw, especially if you're in PPR, he's got a lot of potential in terms of he may get red zone carries, he may get passing, involved in the passing game, especially on third down, and both of those guys are kind of a shot in the dark, but with the news surrounding them, it may be the lottery tickets that pay off, especially
Mm-hmm.
if you have a hole the size of a Jamal Charles on your roster.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we've kind of gone a bit into the running backs. Let's move on to wide receivers.
Yeah.
So, the, I'm gonna preface this with I just dropped Andre Johnson finally, and I'm not regretting that decision, but he
It's
did
like peeling off a Band-Aid.
yeah, and nobody's picked him up in my league, rightfully so. No one I think should pick up Andre Johnson, but he had a monster game in standard leagues. He's putting up 19 in PPR. He had 25. Nick, just explain what happened while I like collect myself.
Yeah. Well, we talked a bit about it, and I kind of made a joke, but the more I thought of it, the more I thought this might actually be what happened. Andre Johnson had a 40-year-old quarterback throwing to him. Andre Johnson's biggest complaint the first 4 weeks of the season was he did not look like he was up to NFL speed. Could it be that the slower 40-year-old quarterback had the same game speed as the slower 35-year-old wide receiver, and those two slow forces hooked up and they had some magical game? That's just my conspiracy theory. I don't think that's really what it was. I think, it was a revenge game. Everyone seems to perform a little better when it's one of these revenge games. Andre Johnson is a Houston legend. So, I think he came out, wanted some blood. But, if you watch his touchdowns, they were really a byproduct of terrible defense. I mean, the first touchdown was just a simple post route that he got behind the defense, and they were 10 yards away from the end zone. That should never happen, but it happened, and Andre Johnson got the easy score. Yeah, I mean, I've seen people picking him up. I think it's, I don't know what you can really hope out of him. He has looked terrible for 4 weeks, and, he caught lightning in a bottle, but I think this is going to be the outlier performance. I think with Andrew Luck coming back, Ty Hilton and Dante Moncrief are the guys to own on that offense. And, on top of that, Johnson's going to have to be fighting for targets with Dwayne Allen and Colby Fleener, who are two pretty good tight ends. Andre Johnson, he's a name guy. It's weird. You see these name guys that get over the hill, but people own them because they're holding on to this notion that, maybe he'll defy father time and he'll come back and catch, lightning in a bottle for a season. And, we saw it with him. You see it occasionally, throughout the league when LT was in New York, he'd every now and then have a big game. And, you could see that they were very slowly falling off that cliff and just kind of going into the twilight of their career. And they'll have these one or two big games and people hurry out and they overvalue them and they want to pick them up or drop someone. But yeah, I'm with you. They play New England next. I don't think, that has the makings of a shootout, but I don't think Andre Johnson's going to be really an active participant in that shootout. I think Ty Hilton's going to get on board if his knee is healthy. I've seen some reports that he's kind of questionable. But, Dante Moncrief is probably going to be reintroduced into the offense. And again, the two tight ends, Dwayne Allen and Colby Fleener. And, they just signed Ahmad Bradshaw, so he's going to be picking up a lot of stuff out of the backfield. Frank Gore looks like he's kind of gotten a little better running, but I think, Bradshaw's going to bite into his, pass catching. But yeah, there's a fair share of weapons on that offense, except the offensive line. But, Andre Johnson, I think last week was more of an anomaly, and I don't know if you can expect that going forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a good bit of it was just, like you said, how bad the Texans were.
So bad.
On paper, it's so frustrating because in the draft, you may remember this. I picked up the Texans and I thought, man, I'm just the smartest guy alive. With the guys they have on paper, their defense should just be lighting it up, and they're just not. They're just not very good this year. It must be something in the water. I don't know what it is.
It's frustrating. I think a lot of it has to do with, Romeo Crennel was a really good defensive coordinator for the Patriots, but everywhere he's gone from then, I think, he was a coach for the Browns, and they were bad. And, last year, the Texans had an okay defense, but, the Texans, when they were at their best, Wade Phillips was the defensive coordinator of them, and they were just lights out, top 3 defense. They were going 14-2, and they were just unstoppable. And, now you look where Wade Phillips is, he's probably the most underappreciated defensive coordinator. He was unemployed last year for whatever reason. Now, he took a job with the Broncos this year. Now they have the best defense in the league. So, I mean, I don't know why they're as bad as they are. I know their best corner, Jonathan Joseph, was injured for a couple of games, but top down, you would think a team that has Jadeveon Clowney, at linebacker, Brian Cushing, J.J. Watt, Vince Wilfork, Marcellus Whitney, or Marcellus Wiley. You would think people like that would, produce more than they are, but you can lump them in the same category as the Dolphins as far as underwhelming defenses this year
Yeah,
goes.
I mean, like, because my initial thoughts were, all right, you got J.J. Watt, you got Clowney, and you got Cushing. I mean, just those three on the field by themselves, let alone like anyone else. Like, I would take those three as a whole defense over, what I would expect out of them, at least, over some of
Right,
the lower defenses in the league. Just those three playing the field, not, the whole 11, just those three. But
right.
uh, anyway, back to Andre Johnson. I completely agree with you. I think it's a flash in the pan. I think at least a small portion of it was them trying to get Andre Johnson his revenge game.
Right.
Like that first drive, I don't even think there was anyone else on the field, at least not as far as they were concerned. I think they were just throwing it to him only, maybe to get the Texans out of the game. I don't know what the purpose was, but and that's really the only reason why I liked Andre Johnson at least a little bit in the back of my mind over the past over this whole year, even when he was doing poorly, was the number of targets. He got a lot of targets, but he just hasn't been producing. He's at like 26 targets with only 15 receptions, and I mean that's just not what you expect out of the guy
No,
of his, I guess,
no.
name recognition.
Right. And I guess, a team in the same division, but it's still, you look at Jacksonville, you look at the two Allens, and, they are both on pace for something like 1,200 yards. And you look at that and you just think, how is this possible given that they're 1-4? They are struggling. And I think, a lot of it has to do with the injuries on defense. And, they just can't, a lot of it also, they can't seem to convert in the red zone. But yeah, I mean, you look at Allen Hurns and Allen Robinson, and these are two guys that kind of came out of nowhere, but are both proving to be capable receivers. I personally took a flyer on Allen Hurns last week as a bye week fill-in. He was kind of just sitting there on the waiver wire, and I'd seen the name. I knew Allen Robinson was a guy, but the more research I did, the more I think that these guys are both kind of not matchup proof, but I don't think it's an anomaly simply because they're both very polished route runners, and when you get two very polished route runners, those are the guys that can kind of sneak behind the defense, or those are the guys that can kind of put on a double move and get open. They're not just athletes that happen to be playing poor competition. They played Tampa Bay, but anyone that knows anything about Lovey's cover two or Tampa two, whatever you want to call it, is there's zones that are always open, and you get two guys that can run routes very well. They're going to find they're going to find those cushions in the zone and chalk up yards. They play Houston, which isn't necessarily a cover two team, but they're not a very good defense, and they're in a pretty poor division. Right now I think I have Hearns. He's probably he's a border, like, I wouldn't feel comfortable with him as my second wide receiver. I would feel comfortable with him as a wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4. Allen Robinson, I think he's a pretty solid wide receiver 2 at this point, particularly because Hearns seems to eat up those intermediate routes, and I think with Julius Thomas coming back, you could see a dip in production there for Hearns. But Allen Robinson seems to be the guy that's both a deep threat and just he seems to be Blake Bortles' go-to guy. I don't know. How do you feel about it, Blake?
Yeah, I mean the team itself, like you said, being 1-4, I think that kind of spells what's to come for Jacksonville. I mean, they're not like a bad team. It's just that I don't think they're good enough to win a lot of games. I think they're good enough to be competitive in a lot of games, but they've just been playing down so much that they've had to resort to this passing game, and Blake Bortles is just throwing it like crazy to these two guys, and I think Yeldon is currently battling a groin injury, so that may kind of benefit them because I can't see Jacksonville trusting. I think they have Toby Gearhart taking first team reps, and that is never a good thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I mean, especially this next game, I can see them both doing well because of that and because of the weakness in the Houston secondary. But yeah, I mean, long term, these guys, like you said, they're running routes well. They are also athletes. So I mean, they're just
Right.
they're all around good wide receivers in a somewhat bad situation in terms of, Blake Bortles isn't going to scare anybody in terms of quarterbacks, but I mean, he's doing well enough that these guys are definitely benefiting. I think with an even better quarterback, that these guys would just be absolutely destroying. I mean, they'd be definitely top of the wide receiver list, but
Right.
I think it's a good situation for them, though. Again, if they had a better quarterback, maybe they aren't playing from behind as much. So I think it's a good situation in terms of fantasy wise for these guys. Like I said, I can't see Jacksonville winning a ton of their games, but I guess we'll see on that.
If Jacksonville can, you know, there's sometimes, garbage time receivers, and if Jacksonville signs themselves in a lot of garbage time, that's when their numbers get padded. But just on, talent alone, I think they hold enough merit that if Jacksonville can stay competitive, they'll hold their value. They play Houston. That's going to be a pretty bad game. But I think for the most part their schedule isn't something that it doesn't look like they're going to be getting blown out very much. They've got Houston, then they've got the Bills. They've got the Ravens, Titans twice. Saints, Texans again. So I mean, those are all. I don't know if I'd say favorable matchups, but they're not. It's not like they're playing New England and Denver the next 12 games. So
Well, they're more like, I think, fantasy favorable matchups again for
yeah,
these guys. And
exactly.
like you said, Thomas, I hope to see a lot from him. I've been stashing him in one league. He just had the 2 catches last game, but I think one, he's probably just recovering from that hand injury he had. They didn't expect him to come back until this coming week, and I can just see him, especially in the red zone, being a huge factor. Uh, in this coming game against Houston, I think it might actually be a really good matchup as well. In terms of, I think it's going to be a shootout. I mean, Hoyer's been doing well. If they go with Hoyer,
Mm-hmm.
Houston had Mallet throwing tantrums on the sideline, and I think if they're
Yeah.
smart, they go with Hoyer. He's been giving them the better opportunity to win there. And if they do, like I said, I can see that being a shootout, especially if I don't know Foster's injury status. I think he's okay after the potential concussion and
Yeah,
all the
he's
other.
he's good to go. It sounds like he admitted he was perfectly healthy for whatever that's worth.
Well, and he's pretty honest in the media in terms of his injury status and whatever. Like I haven't seen anything that he's said that has kind of gone against what he does. He's a pretty
Yeah,
good in terms of fantasy, especially. He's a good guy to have on your team because you'll know exactly from his mouth what's going on
right,
with him. But
right.
well, that's wide receivers. Do you want to go into tight ends about your former player Antonio Gates?
Yeah, I picked up Antonio Gates. I was kind of sitting on him, and I made a trade today. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but we shall see. I know Gates is a notoriously fast starter. He always comes out of the gate, no pun intended, very quickly.
You're killing me with these puns today. The
Oh,
bear
I
and
know. I need to. Oh gosh, it's terrible. Uh, but anyway, yeah, I know he comes out of the gate quickly, and then he kind of tapers off because his body is a 35-year-old, big body tight end. So knees start to give out, and ankles, all sorts of stuff starts to kind of fall apart. I shipped off Gates for another old fart and Peyton Manning, with the mentality that Peyton Manning's got a soft schedule. In 4 weeks after Peyton Manning hopefully looks like a somewhat his former self, I can maybe package Peyton Manning with one of my backup wide receivers and really upgrade at that position. Gates is Philip Rivers' sole red zone target, but Ladarius Green still had a decent game last week. Didn't fall by the wayside, and that was a game last week that set itself up for a lot of passing. Pittsburgh's not a great defense. San Diego's not a great defense. So you get two bad defenses together, and this is kind of what you get. That being said, I don't think this is, Gates is a good tight end. He's been doing it for 10 years. This isn't some fluky performance where, oh my God. In fact, he scored his 100th touchdown last Monday. So he's a good tight end. I, I mean, I personally think, he wasn't out. He was out 4 weeks. He had a huge game against Pittsburgh. Selling high isn't the worst thing you can do right now. He could very well come back and have a 4-point game, and I don't think I don't think I could have gotten Peyton Manning for Gates at that point. I think, you have a great game, you have a bad game, and, the value begins to kind of dip somewhere in the middle, leaning towards bad. So, again, if you have Gates, I think you're comfortable starting him. Green Bay is not a great fantasy pass defense, but yeah, I mean, it's a situation to keep your eye on. Gates last year started out very hot and kind of cooled off to the point where, people were dropping him. So, he's 35 years old. He's a tight end. He's taken a lot of hits over the years, and he's been injured quite a bit over the years. So, you know, see what you can get for him. Maybe kind of put some feelers out there. If you can get a decent, backup player that could possibly, I have Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck's been injured. He's a guy that for the past few weeks has been an anomaly. Peyton Manning hasn't been that great, but I feel comfortable with both them on my roster because I know, as the season goes on, that kind of gives me some leverage to trade one of them for maybe an asset in the future. So I like Gates if we're talking about his performance alone. I don't know how many times you can count on 2 touchdowns, but he's a guy that's going to get, probably 60, 70 yards a game with Phillip Rivers throwing to him.
Well, and like you said, that is if he's healthy. I've had Gates a couple of years in fantasy, and, he's a great guy to have on your team. It's just the injuries. He's a great guy to have while he's playing. I think the past couple of years he's been dealing with a nagging toe injury, which doesn't sound like much, to the lay person, but in terms of football, I mean, your big toe especially is the most important part, I would say, on your body. I mean, obviously, hamstrings and ACLs, those can be nagging, but you see a guy like Devin Hester returning punts, he's got turf toe, and like I said, to the lay person, that sounds like nothing, but your big toe is where you get a lot of your acceleration, cutting. Yep. Just all out explosiveness, and Gates I don't think has been hobbled by that, but you got a big body, a big old body that has just been used and abused over the years, and I think it does spell a recipe for disaster in terms of his health. He's proven year over year that he is an injury concern.
He got 11 targets last week, which is a ridiculous amount of targets, but I think that's going to, that was kind of his game. That was sort of, he was pissed off about getting busted for PEDs. He had been, vowing revenge during his suspension. You knew he was going to come up and just have a huge game. It was his version of going back and playing the home team. We talked about Andre Johnson kind of exploding for one of those like once in a season performances. I don't want to say Gates is not going to be a guy that's going to perform, but I think he'll perform better than Andre Johnson will for the rest of his schedule. But, to rely on him for 27 points in a PPR league, that's you're kind of, you're banking on a lot from a guy that the heir apparent is also catching passes in Ladarius Green. So, I don't want to say that Antonio Gates isn't going to be a guy that's going to be fantasy relevant, but he's another one, a big name, older guy. He plays Green Bay next, but, San Diego's got to play Denver. They've got to play, I think, an improved Oakland defense. They don't exactly have an easy schedule. So, they play the NFC North, so they've still got to play some of those tougher defenses. But, I think he's a guy to keep your eye on. But, I was personally offered several trades for Antonio Gates, and I was kind of surprised just because he is, a nice player, but this isn't 2004, this is 2015, and, he's 35 years old, so I don't know what you can expect really realistically out of him.
Well, the good thing about his suspension in terms of, fantasy only is that I think it gave the teams that, obviously the ones that haven't traded to get him, they gave those teams an opportunity to say, like, all right, I'm going to need somebody for 4 weeks at least to be able to put up some numbers in the tight end position. And so I think that kind of prepares you a little bit for the possibility that he gets injured. I'm a little bit on the opposite side of things than you. I think Gates, 10 targets, it's a little high, but I can see him continuing those types of numbers just with the
Phillip Rivers loves him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the well that they keep going to in terms of, all right, I need somebody to throw this ball to. San Diego's at least to me, pretty well known to spread the ball to everyone except for the tight end position. I mean, they pretty much the tight end you can count on, and then all the wide receivers. I think Rivers just picks a guy he likes each game and says, "All right, this game I'm going to give you every single pass that I throw." You saw it last year, and Eddie Royal and Allen was there in the mix, and I think it was Michael Floyd or one of the Floyds was there. And I mean, it's a repeat this year. I think Allen has a lot more skill in terms of just like experience and building a rapport as well with Rivers. But I don't think you can count on the wide receivers, and especially not the running backs. But tight end, I think Gates, as long as he's healthy, will be someone they can go to.
Yeah, and I guess moving on about from yesterday's game, or depending on when you listen to this, Thursday night's game. I guess, do you want to pick a guy that you think had a big day, or do you want to talk about a couple guys that you think maybe like I know Ben Watson isn't going to be putting up what he put up yesterday. I mean, that was a ridiculous showing. He's been in the league 10 years. He's a good tight end, but I've always looked at Ben Watson as a guy that might be good for 3 or 4 catches, 40, 50 yards, and a TD sprinkled in. Yesterday was, I think, New Orleans saw something in the Falcons' defense, and they just exploited the heck out of it.
Well, and I'll tell you exactly what they saw. They saw the Falcons trying to prevent Ingram from having a good game, which they weren't really able to do, at least from a fantasy perspective. And they're trying to prevent Breeze from killing us on the through the air for the wide receivers. And I think basically Atlanta's game plan was, let's just leave the tight end position open because Jimmy Graham isn't around anymore, and let's see what they can do. And really, the Saints in general did not look all that impressive to me. Obviously Ingram was what we expected him to be, but I mean, pretty much everyone else except for the defense, they underperformed. I think that game goes differently in terms of score if the Falcons were able to keep it together on offense. And
Right.
the problem with the Falcons that game, I think, was just inconsistency in the center position. We had I forget his first name. It's Stone at center.
Oh, yeah.
And like you kind of talked about earlier, basically, I think his game plan was just, I'm going to hike the ball right into my taint and hope somebody catches it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
half the time, Matt Ryan was in shotgun for 2 of the fumbles. I think they recovered one of the ones where he was in shotgun. And then on a 4th down, no, actually they recovered both when he was in shotgun. There's a 4th down where they were going to go for it, and he hiked it to Ryan's hands, but I think he just kind of missed Ryan's hands a little bit, and again that was a turnover, but again that was 4th down, so it didn't make that much of a difference.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was more, the Falcons shot themselves in the foot rather than the Saints really rose up and did anything, spectacular. Again, a win is a win. I know they were looking for one any way they could get it. I don't know. Their offense is full of just dudes. I don't know. It's weird. It's, I know they have salary cap issues. They brought in C.J. Spiller, and he looks like he's getting outperformed by Kerry Robinson, who's been on the Saints roster for a really long time. Josh Hill was supposed to be, the guy that was going to fill in for Jimmy Graham, and he's kind of been very underwhelming this year. Likewise with Cooks, but, Cooks is a rookie, and rookie receivers are, always sort of a crapshoot. So, Breeze is the glue to hold that offense together, but you look at the performances and you look at Breeze, you look at Ingram, and, you take away Ben Watson and you just think, well, that was okay. And that nobody really stands out to you. Willie Snead is a guy that I guess, he's kind of coming along, but he looks like much more of a quick hitting guy to pick, a chain mover than really a difference maker. And I don't know if that's worthy of really starting in fantasy much. He could be a guy, I guess, if you need to play him in a pinch on a bye week, you could maybe keep him on your roster. But even then, I think you could find, I don't know, I would rather find someone that's underperforming and kind of like, I would rather get a guy like Golden Tate on my roster who's done nothing all year than a guy like Willie Snead who's kind of come on. And I think Willie Snead's floor might be 5 points, but his ceiling might be 9 points. Whereas Golden Tate's floor might be 2 points, but his ceiling might be 22 points. So, I like keeping those kinds of guys on my bench as sort of a lottery ticket just in case, I cash them in. And as far as the Falcons go, we talked about Freeman, Matt Ryan. I think he exceeded what he was expected to score this week, but he's still kind of he's looked a little iffy in some games this year. Julio Jones is, still kind of coming over his injury, and Roddy White emerged from the dead to catch a TD. But a lot of people like Jacob Tamme. I know you're a Falcons fan, so I'll kind of let you go on about what you saw of the Falcons. But yeah, I mean, it was an exciting game, but from a fantasy perspective, there wasn't much going on if you didn't have Freeman or Ingram or the two quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I want to preface my statements for the Falcons. I know a lot of people are kind of swayed for their favorite team. They kind of, I guess, boost things that don't need to be boosted and kind of ignore the bad things. I like to consider myself somebody who can remain impartial when I'm talking about my team. I mean, obviously I want them to do well, but I don't want my comments to be ignored just because I like the Falcons.
Right.
That being said, like I said, we already mentioned Devonta Freeman and Tevin Coleman. Ryan, he's a good quarterback, and I think this game especially, he was kind of hindered by the center play. I think they're actually going to go with Persons is the we don't really have a good starting center right now because we lost McClure and Joe Hawley, and you lose guys like that, and it's kind of hard to find an immediate replacement.
Right.
But I think Stone is just going to go back to the depths, maybe even the practice squad. I mean, he's not horrible, I guess, but I mean, he's just not a center for one, at least one that should be starting.
Yeah, he looked a little outmatched.
Yeah.
I think he got in his own head, too. I mean, I don't know how you can snap it into your ass and then kind of not realize that you did that. I don't know. It was funny and not funny because, like, he snaps it. Like, he snapped it straight into his butt, and then it falls on the ground, and then he continues on with his blocking assignment instead of realizing what he did. And I've never really played football at any sort of organized level, outside of intramurals, but I would think you could feel that. I don't know if, that's not a sense. I don't know how he can do that, especially because I think it was a shotgun snap. So it's not like the quarterback's hands were under center. It was, he was supposed to spike it back 2 or 3 yards and instead spiked it directly upwards into his rectum. So,
well, I think it's mainly the experience there. And I honestly think on that play, I know exactly what you're talking about. I think on that one, at least, he may have thought Ryan was under center. Again, that's his mistake, but again, I think that's maybe why he had the reaction he did. One of the main reasons, too, that I think he did that, because you saw him, again, put that thing right in his taint and then just, like, rush forward. And I think what he was doing there is just, he's getting beat all night in terms of blocking. Cameron Jordan was giving him fits, the whole line fits. And, the Saints did have a really good showing in terms of defensive line. So I think he was more thinking about, oh my gosh, I need to stop this person quickly and get into my stance more than he was like, oh, I need to hike the ball and then do this. But
it is the funniest thing in football when, like, an offensive lineman doesn't have anyone to block, so they just stand in place and shuffle side to side with their arms in front of them, because that's what he did.
Yeah.
Like, he was seriously, the ball was, flopping on the ground, and here he is kind of like he's dancing in a phone booth with his hands out in front of him. And and he's not the only one that it's happened to. I mean, it happens occasionally. These guys just miss their assignments, and it's like they just shuffle side to side looking for someone to block.
Well, they do the jazz hands getting ready to block somebody.
Yeah. But. So, it's goofy to see. Like you said, he's probably overmatched right now. He would be a guy that I think they're going to look to replace. But yeah, I mean, we know the Falcons probably, playing in New Orleans, jazzed on a Thursday night. They had Steve Gleason in the building. They were celebrating a lot, and it was a must-win game. I personally picked the Saints just because I thought that's kind of the game that they'll win that game, but they'll lose next week. That's kind of a game you get yourself amped up for, but then, I think they'll come crashing down to earth. But
Well, they've had our number for years. I hate to say I cannot stand the Saints, but
yeah,
they've
I mean,
absolutely had our number for a number of years now. But
yeah, and it's, Matt Ryan against everyone else is 66-36. Against the Saints, he's 5-9, which isn't terrible. But it just kind of goes to show that everybody has their nemesis. Jay Cutler cannot beat the Packers, and he is far less successful than Matt Ryan is. But, it's one of those things where certain teams, no matter how talent deprived they are, seem to be able to just kind of, I don't know, rise to the occasion and beat the team, and then they'll go and lose to a team like the Jaguars, or get blown out by the Eagles in Philadelphia.
well,
So
and that's division games. I mean, I've learned every year that no matter what's happening, no matter how good or bad one team is, yeah, I always pick the Dolphins over New England because at least once a year, sometimes even twice, as bad as the Dolphins have been over the past few years, they've managed to beat New England. And I mean, it's just that type of thing with every sort of division
yeah,
game.
it's certainly something to keep in mind when you're doing matchups, when you're looking at setting your roster, because for a while, I mean, Calvin Johnson, I still think he's a top receiver, and there's just a lot of bad things going on in Detroit that are kind of hindering him. But, for a while, he was untouchable. I mean, he was putting up millions of yards, and it seemed every time he played the Bears, he had a game. I mean, he would go 4 catches for 56 yards and no touchdowns. And it's just, there's certain players that, like you said, there's teams that are just their kryptonite, and you can never figure it out. It doesn't really have an explanation. It's just that's the way it is. Whether it's an opposing player who, Charles Tillman was Calvin Johnson's kryptonite forever. But yeah, I mean, you look at the game, you look at what I end up looking at in these games is kind of seeing how guys like C.J. Spiller did, because, that was a big free agent acquisition, and you expected him to be that Darren Sproles role, and he just – I don't know if it's just that he's getting settled in. I know he was injured, but he looks way uncomfortable in that offense, doing something that I thought he would look comfortable doing. So,
From a fantasy perspective, I mean, CJ Spiller has been a pretty perennial disappointment. There's always a ton of
yeah,
hype. And I mean, he's always had the athletic ability. He's always had that, change of pace. Like, you never know, he could just explode for 100 yards on one carry. But I mean, it just never, at least to me, comes to fruition, except for I think his first year out, he did well. And maybe that's where a lot of that hype's coming from. But I mean, just the big play potential that Spiller has is so enticing. But I've learned to just, I guess just slap my hand away anytime I try and
yeah,
draft them. Especially, I don't know if you remember, I think it was 2 years ago, my fantasy team name was Spilled Milk off of Spiller.
yeah,
And that's exactly what it was. I mean, my whole season
yeah.
centering my team around Spiller was probably the worst decision I've ever made in my life.
Yeah, I think he really, unfortunately for him, his best years were when Chan Gailey was offensive coordinator. And now Gailey's up in New York doing some pretty good things with Chris Ivory. I honestly kind of thought C.J. Spiller might go there and try to resurrect his career, but he chose New Orleans, which again wasn't a terrible choice. But I don't think he's elusive enough to be Darren Sproles, and he's not a good enough runner to be Mark Ingram, or not a big bruising enough runner. So he's kind of in that limbo spot of being a sort of too big to be elusive, too small to be bruising. So hopefully they can figure out what to do with him, because he can catch out of the backfield. But, I think they're just seeing Kerry Robinson as basically C.J. Spiller, but maybe just a little better, or at least a little more well-versed in their offense.
Well, I think what it was, especially with Spiller going to New Orleans, would be, New Orleans has been kind of known to use that type of back very well. Pierre Thomas and Darren Sproles are two names that immediately spring to mind. And I think he went down there to kind of fill that role. But Ingram has just been doing so well in terms of pass catching that, I mean, why would you want to change out your backs? I mean, other than to give Ingram a little breather, but why would you want to change out your backs when, the defense doesn't know if Ingram's just going to plow it straight up the middle, if you're going to toss it to him on the outside? I mean, just having that threat is so much better than, Spiller's in, so they're either going to pass it to like a wide receiver downfield and not even use him, or they're gonna toss it to him out of the backfield or something. I mean, there's just no reason for him. And just real quick, I know we spent a little bit of time on this game, but to go back to what you're saying about Willie Snead, I actually kind of have the opposite opinion of you as well there, where I think Snead can be a good player going forward in that offense just because Breeze has had a little bit of shoulder issues. So, I don't know if it's really affecting him long term, but I think it
Mm-hmm.
has had an effect on him so far in terms of, you don't see him throwing the deep ball as much. And Snead looks like the guy in the slot filling type like a Wes Welker type role or, something like
Right.
that where, Brandon Cooks is good enough to draw some coverage. Like he'll draw the number one coverage. Should be pretty much every time unless they're isolating like a side. But Snead, I think, can kind of get open in the slot and really produce some numbers this year. But
Yeah.
I guess we'll see on that.
Yeah. We shall see.
Well, we spent a good amount of time on that Thursday night game, so let's get into our deep sleepers and then wrap it up. Nick,
Yeah.
I've been waiting. I asked you earlier what your deep sleeper was, and it is a well kept secret, so I can't wait to hear who it is.
All right. Well, we're gonna venture into the neglected realm of the tight end because nobody likes talking about tight ends, and probably rightfully so. I've got a 1 week sleeper, and then I've got a little, season long sleeper. Meaning one guy that I think might perform just this week, and then another guy that might be worth keeping your eye on for the rest of the year. My 1 week sleeper is a guy named Kari Lee. He is with the Bears, and as we alluded to earlier, Martellus Bennett is battling an injury, and he's really only a decent sleeper if Bennett ends up missing that game. So, it's something to keep your eye on before the game. And if you play in a league where tight ends are just so scarce. But the reason I mentioned Kari Lee is the Bears gave up a 6th-round pick for him earlier this year from the Texans. He's a rookie. If you watched Hard Knocks, he was a guy that did the Bill O'Brien impersonation. And basically, they see him as a Martellus Bennett light. He is a big guy. He is a matchup nightmare. Last week they actually tried to go to him downfield, and Cutler slightly overthrew him, so he missed it. But I see a lot of people kind of referencing Zach Miller as maybe a guy that you want to keep your eye on. But I disagree. I think Zach Miller is more of a blocking tight end. I think he might peel out and catch a 4 or 5 yard pass here and there. But I think Kari Lee is the guy that you'll see flexed out into a slot receiver role against the linebacker or safety, and they would hope to exploit. So that's my 1 week sleeper. My year-long sleeper is a guy from Miami named Jake Stoneburner. And the reason I pick him over Jordan Cameron, the coach that took over for Philbin is an ex-tight end. And he wasn't just a pass-catching tight end. He was a very aggressive blocking tight end. So Jordan Cameron's not a great blocker. He's more of a guy that, is in the mold of like a Martellus Bennett or he's going to flex out. He's going to get his catches, and then he's going to be, kind of moot in the blocking game. Even though Bennett's a pretty decent blocker, I think we all think of Bennett as more of a pass-catching tight end. Stoneburner is a guy much in the mold of Campbell, and I think that's the guy. I got to check. It's Campbell, I believe, is the now the coach instead of Philbin.
Yep.
Yeah, and if you watch if you go back and read about his career, he was much more of a blocking tight end. So I see this situation a lot like the Eagles with Brent Selleck and Zach Ertz, when Selleck was the one that they actually played more than the guys more than Ertz, who I think is more talented. But reason being that Stoneburner is more in the mold of the tight end that I think Campbell likes. And I think he's going to get more playing time. And for that reason, I think he's probably going to be a guy at least to keep your eye on. So those are my 2 deep sleepers, and I think the deepest of depths are both of those guys. Like I said, if you're looking for a guy to start this week, if it comes out, tomorrow being Saturday that Bennett's going to be out, Kari Lee might be a guy to take a flyer on because, if Jeffrey and Royal are hobbled and it's just Marquez Wilson, they're going to need a tight end to throw to, and that's where I think Kari Lee might come in and take a couple targets. So I don't know, Blake, what do you think of who are your sleepers this week?
So this week you went with tight end. I'll go with wide receiver. I have 2 guys that I think are going to be good, probably just this week only, mainly as fill-ins, as the buys come through. Mm-hmm. If you really need some guys here. Out of New York, and this is dependent on the health of Odell Beckham, which he's kind of iffy. They may or may not start him. And Ruben Randall. I believe Ruben Randall's a full go, but he is still Ruben Randall. So
Right.
my pick would be Dwayne Harris. They're playing against Philadelphia coming up, and I think one out of the two of OBJ or Ruben Randall will get the nod, and one will probably sit out. I'm leaning toward OBJ probably missing the game, but I think Dwayne Harris benefits from that the most. He's been a pretty decent play week over week. This past week he had 7 points in standard and 13 in PPR, so he's getting the targets. Eli Manning likes to throw it, and I just think the stars are aligning for Dwayne Harris this week. Again, I think it's a little bit more dependent on OBJ and how his injury develops, but the good thing about this is Dwayne Harris has a Monday night game. That way, if you have some injuries or just
Mm-hmm.
something that you think, oh man, it's Sunday and I don't have anyone where I can fill this person in. Dwayne Harris and even Shane Vereen might be some good pickups, just because of the matchup and the injuries. I think both those guys may benefit. My
Yeah.
other sleeper pick would be Stephon Diggs out of Minnesota. They're playing Kansas City coming out of the bye. Diggs is he's coming. He's kind of making a little bit more out of, I think, his talent level. But Kansas City gives him an opportunity to really just take advantage of a secondary. Mike Wallace would also possibly be a good play. He may or may not be available. It's mainly the matchup. Kansas City has
Right.
just been giving up tons and tons to the passing game.
Yep. And Dontari Poe is going to miss this game.
Yeah, yeah,
Their big nose tackle,
exactly.
so
And
it
then with
bodes well.
Charles being out, that's going to hurt the offense for Kansas City,
Mm-hmm.
leading to more opportunities. Also, the you kind of alluded to Alex Smith not being a great quarterback. Also, he's very conservative, so if he doesn't have something, he'll just throw it right in the dirt. And like I
Right.
said, that just gives Minnesota more opportunities to score.
So there you go. So if you want to win, you need to put Dwayne Harris, Stephon Diggs as your two receivers, Kari Lee as your tight end, and then
Yeah, just go ahead and flex Stoneburner.
Stoneburner as your
There you go.
flex. And you might get a total of 8 points.
Exactly. So, Nick, maybe when you start just like picking just
Yeah.
the bottom of the dregs guys off the waivers and just make a whole team that everyone can start
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah, and we'll put it into FanDuel and see how much we
There we
win.
go.
See how much it costs. It'd probably be like an $8,000
Yeah.
team. I guess I don't know, Blake. I guess that about wraps it
Yeah,
up.
yeah. That's about our time. That's pretty much it for this week. If you like what you heard, just give us a like, favorite, maybe leave a comment on our YouTube page, or you can always hit us up on Twitter. Made the Flex Podcast Twitter account, so we can answer any of your questions or whatever you guys want to talk about.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, well, Nick, thank you very much, and I guess we'll see y'all next week.
See you next week, guys.